So let's see. I'm gonna pull up this agenda slide again and see where we are in the day. Okay, so we just did our updates. That's great. Oh yeah, next up, we're gonna have some more updates, but this time from each of the working groups. So we'll just call on these in the order that they are on the screen here. I think local procurement landscape is up first. So here, this will just be, a couple few minutes of a quick update, and then if anyone has any questions, we can ask some questions, and then we'll move on. So I think Alicia is the brave volunteer to give us this update. Take it away.
Sorry, there is a dog barking in the background, so please just ignore that. So we had a great meeting this last week with a core group of us, and Liz, we're looking forward to involving you soon, or not Liz, sorry, Linda, another elder, involving you more in that conversation as well soon. We had a great conversation trying to start to talk about the different levers that each of us can really pull as far as being a public entity or private entity. And I think, Doug, was it you? You have got the federal background too, or unless I'm like grabbing the wrong person here. Maybe it was one of the others. So we have some people in the group with some public and private background, which is also great, as we're kind of trying to figure out what you can do. Is it MWB? Is it capital? Is it A&E? Is it supplies? Is it low? As we put this all under the umbrella of how do we hire local, and what does that look like? So here we have the kind of the high level future states of what we'd like to see. The first one really is we want to be aware of what our possibilities are, what our limitations are, and also how we can help each other through that. As far as is just because somebody has a limitation over here, maybe somebody else has a solution that can weave into it. We also want our anchors and local businesses to have greater visibility of our projects and of the opportunities. We started to talk about a potential portal that could be both for as far as us posting out opportunities, and then also a better way of all of our different entities knowing who's out there. So we've talked about sharing small works rosters, things like that, a variety of different ways of sharing information, and also having a portal and making it and talking about different strategies of how do we have like a one-stop shop for a lot of us. Like a business is like, I want to work locally, what do I do, and how do we make that easier for them? So we are high level right now, starting to talk solutions, but still definitely that's a place we want to go. Access to capital was one thing we talked about, especially when we were talking about micro and small businesses, of how do we make it easier for those businesses that are just getting started and buying supplies up front on a project, or maybe they've been around for a while, but again, that circulation of money, how can we make that easier for them to not risk their entire business to go after like a government contract, especially because that can be a substantial holdup when there's can be a long turnaround for payment and progress payment, and there's all these requirements. How do we make it easier to have that circulation of money, and maybe and try to not put them in as much risk when they go after like a government contract? But then on the private side too, sometimes when it's a large corporation, that can have some like payment holdups and other things as well. So really looking to remove barriers of small local businesses so that they can get in the flow, and we're really building those businesses up. So looking at everything from the micro and the small to the big, we need that ecosystem of everyone, and we need people to grow, and how do we support that? Another one was and again, understanding those barriers. How do we get to better know where are the stuck points, and where can we go? How can we overcome those barriers, and working together to do that? A lot of great ideas were put out already as far as trying to have some sort of common fund, having a portal. How do we do joint tracking, and maybe being able to report out with a common language so we actually understand the progress that we're able to make? We want local businesses to want to work with anchor institutions, and we want anchor institutions to want to work with local businesses and know how. That is the go-to. Be like, we are going to default to local businesses and this is how to do it. And we know a place to find them, because finding businesses is sometimes a big holdup for all kinds of projects or supplies and the needs. So how do we make it easier on both sides for the business to work with all of us? And how do we make it easier for all of us to find those local businesses and better support them and know what to do? Abigail, you want to tag on to that?
Oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, but it's it's been noted among us that it would be really nice to have a guiding document specific to our work group. Something like a charter, something that states our big goals and purpose so that we know what to prioritize and where we're going over the long term. So all these great ideas that Alicia so capably described will somehow fall into line under a guiding document. Oh, and Casey mentioned that we needed a problem statement too, which I think is really genius.
Thanks, Alicia and Abigail, for that update. Are there others from the group who wanted to add anything else from the conversation for the procurement landscape group? No. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? That was a lot of, there's a lot going on in this thought and process. I think the big takeaway here is, getting clearer and clearer in terms of the things that we're able to control and the outcomes we want to have on that. But any questions for the procurement group?
Danny, I have a question because I know I kind of sat in being like the outlier of that group during the in-person. How does this take into because I know Casey, like you're starting that committee and getting folks in, but how does this take into context like those that aren't businesses, thinking specifically of nonprofits that also have to deal with like government contracts? And I know procurement's a little bit different. However, I think the process in itself is fairly similar when we're talking about barriers. And so I'd just be curious as we can, continue moving through this, continuing that conversation and also elevating those other folks that aren't necessarily identified as businesses and the traditional procurement that you all are talking about. And that's not really a question. I'm just kind of rambling. Sorry, it's Friday.
Denise, I've been thinking about you a lot because Metro Parks is trying to understand contract equity for vendors and programming, and I've been trying to figure out if that conversation can be of service to you and how to make sense of all of that from your perspective. So I would love to talk to you more a little bit offline if you have time for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, my video's off. I said earlier in Yelm, the internet is hit or miss, and the video is not great this morning, so I'm keeping it off. But yes, please reach out to me.
You got it.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions for the procurement group? Okay, cool. So moving right along, next up is we're going to hear from the Healthcare Careers Pathways Working Group, which had a couple of meetings since the retreat, and my volunteer presenter from that group is not here today. That's, well, okay. In that case, I'll just give the improvised Danny Fisher-Brunn's version of the Healthcare Careers Pathways group, just to let you know a little bit about what's happening here. So similar to the procurement landscape working group, the Healthcare Careers Pathways working group is trying to get clearer about the problem statement. There's so many things in healthcare career pathways that this network might influence and the ways that we could be useful. And it's easy for that to just spiral if we're not clear about the problem statement. So the most progress that this group made is really starting to get clear about what are some of these really important components of a problem statement and what are some of the really important components of the outcomes that we want to see through any sort of program we might build together or collaboration we might do as a group. So components of the problem statement here are there's a chronic lack of healthcare professionals locally. There's a nursing shortage has been an issue for a long time, especially from diverse backgrounds. So another component of the problem statement is that financial barriers, kind of the need to support oneself, one's family, while getting education, are a key factor. They're not the only factor, but they're a key factor in preventing people from pursuing training and career development. And then the pathways from entry-level work in healthcare to living wage career jobs are unclear. So you can get your foot in the door, but where do you go next? So these are some of the dimensions of this problem statement. Key outcomes that this group is really excited about are, we want to make sure that any pathways we're creating are leading to living wage jobs, not just entry-level jobs that have nowhere to go from there, but we want to make sure that we're clear about getting to living wage jobs. Another outcome is that lack of financial resources is no longer a barrier to preventing folks from pursuing training. So, do what we can to alleviate that barrier. And then another outcome is that health systems are able to meet employment needs locally. So these are some of the dimensions of this work. Really exciting conversation, kind of in a parallel track to what's happening in procurement. Liz, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Danny. I am wondering if you could remind us who comprised that working group.
Great question. Yes. So I have that list. Not something I should probably send out sooner rather than later. Is it actually a working group roster? But there are representatives from Multicare. Jolita Perez is on that. From Virginia Mason Franciscan, there are 4 people who are on the group that are kind of sharing that. And then there's Krista Fox from TCC, Bill Swarens from Bates, and Kari from Workforce Central are kind of the core group. And then there are a few other members as well.
Okay, that's helpful. We are in contact with the Health Careers Pathways through TPS and Multicare, and just want to be sure that we're sort of in the same conversations would be helpful.
Yeah. Oh, Marilee Tambara from Healthcare Careers Academy with TPS as part of the group as well. Yeah. Yep. And that's one thing that the group is really trying to navigate is, how do we make sure that we are not duplicating any of the work of other collaborations happening in this space, and mutually using resources that these other groups are creating so that we're not reinventing the wheel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions for this group, knowing that I'm not the expert on this, but I can either make up an answer or refer you to someone who can answer it later. Okay, cool. Moving right along. So affordable housing is our next group. So Jacques is on the line. Jacques, are you in transit? Are you able to just share a little bit about the affordable housing working group?
I am, but I can do my best, and then maybe you can add anything, Danny. But there's not much to update because unfortunately our last meeting, we didn't have great attendance. So hoping that this month we are able to get back on track. But just as a reminder, the 2 kind of project ideas that really were the spark for these discussions were a housing corridor on 19th, so in between the 2 campuses, and figuring out what that might look like. And then finding creative funding strategies for housing investments as a network. And so I think similar to what I heard from the other groups, our next steps are going to be to really try to define what our vision, mission, and values are, and then what what next steps we need to identify to move forward with those 2 ideas. But would invite anyone else to jump in and add to that if there's anything else.
I think that was a good summary from my perspective as well. Questions specifically about the affordable housing working group? Okay, cool. So yeah, this is all very exciting. I think there's each of these groups are kind of on parallel tracks in defining, purpose and outcomes. And this is actually a really good segue to, the kind of the macro level parallel track that we're on as a network and getting clearer about our own purpose and outcomes. And so the 4th working group that was at the retreat was the Executive Anchor Champions working group. And one thing that came out of that conversation was just the need to have kind of a clearer network charter to clarify our purpose, our goals, our roles, expectations, things like that as a network. So I wanted to spend the rest of our meeting time today kind of discussing a charter and putting together some skeletons of ideas that could evolve into this. I'll share a timeline of this in just a moment. But before we get into that, I think this is a very exciting milestone for the network. As many of you who've been around for a long time, we've kind of evolved from this point where it was it was really just trust and relationships that were holding us together, keeping people at the table. Last year, we got a little bit clearer with a strategic framework that kind of ideologically kind of wrapped our ideas in a clearer purpose. And now that we're getting into, wanting to do some work together, expanding our partnerships, the need to get a little bit clearer on our focuses happen. So I see collaboration as very cyclical, but each time you kind of come around this circle, you get to another layer of depth. And so this is a really cool, point for me as just kind of an observer of this network over the years. So I'm excited about this step that we're at. So a charter is really just a way to set expectations, scope of work, roles, and things of that. We're focusing on it now because, as I mentioned, this is the evolutionary stage we're at as a network. But one thing I wanted to just highlight about a network charter in general, and my work, working with teams around defining charters. Oftentimes the process of creating a charter is as important as the final product you create. So as we move forward with this, we're really hoping that this can be a participatory process that we're getting all of the anchor members to be involved with, because it's just an opportunity to just have some really good conversations with each other about what we're hoping for. So let's see. Okay, so the components of a charter, this is something, actually, let me tell you the timeline before we jump into the work here. So this is what we're thinking. I've been having conversations with a number of you kind of about the charter in general, but this is kind of what we're thinking in terms of a timeline of creating this. In early June, maybe have a small design team to kind of meet and creatively brainstorm what are the pieces of this, kind of put together the skeleton of the charter that we can fill in. Then in mid-June, kind of have a full charter committee, which ideally I would like to have representation from each anchor institution there. So I'll be working with many of you to kind of identify, who is the best person from your institution, how can we get all the members engaged in this process. But this group will meet to kind of fill in that skeleton that's created. And throughout July and August, we'll kind of continue to develop and iterate on this charter. There'll probably be opportunities in some of these monthly meetings to kind of react to some of these drafts, give some input, and then ideally, there's a cap on my computer, hello. Ideally, by September, we can have something that anchor, all the anchors can kind of commit to, and then we can move forward from there. So that's the timeline we're thinking of. Any questions about that, reactions to that? Let's see, nodding.
What's your kitty's name?
Oh, this is Philip Glass Collins. He has 3 names. He likes to work on computers. Yeah, into electronic things. Whoops, something weird is going on my screen now. Okay, so other questions about the timeline or by Kat? No, okay. So these are, so we've been thinking about the components of the charter, and really the question here is like, what are the things that we need to clarify for ourselves, for external audiences? And so this is a list that I've compiled from just things that have come up already in conversations. So a clear, concise mission, vision, value statement, defining roles, responsibilities, expectations of members and of partners, defining more clearly what it means to be a member, which institutions are members, what makes them, anchor institutions in this network, why would they become a member, decision-making processes, what are the sorts of decisions we're going to need to make as a network, how are we going to make those, internal and external communications, goals, and then evaluation and accountability plans for those goals. What do we want to accomplish? How are we going to, hold ourselves to that and track our progress? So those are a few things that have come up, and I'm just curious, what else might you add to this list that you have been thinking about for the network, or that maybe you think others might want to know about the network?
Danny, is there any benefit to having a timeline in a charter, or is that not what a charter is about?
That's a great question. I think a timeline can be really helpful. Are you thinking like, how long does this network exist, or time-bound goals, or what was on your mind?
Yeah, maybe maybe it's more meta than that. Maybe it's, you know, with a, maybe it's part of the accountability plan, right? Like, how will we know when we're done?
Mm-hmm.
And will we be done? Is this an ongoing? Is the network ongoing, right? Once you, are these forever, are these 3 working groups are forever working groups, or I guess that's part of the mission, vision, and values.
Yeah, that's great. Those are really important questions here. Yeah.
Danny, this is Linda.
Yes.
Is this somewhat like a bylaws? In other words, is there a desire to have a turnover of people within the group? Would you want to set timeline for membership or agency representative, or is it just as long as you are willing and able to participate? And I'm thinking, is there a 2-year term, 3-year term, or is there a desire for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something that this charter should definitely answer. Yeah. Casey.
I would add boundaries. So what are the boundaries for the group?
Can you say more about how you're using boundaries?
Sure. So boundaries, like maybe things that are off limits, maybe something that's politically unfeasible, or just parts of the process of going through either procurement, housing, healthcare careers, things that we are not going to address, like things that we know we're not going to touch.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So this is kind of like the boundaries of our scope of work, of the types of goals we're pursuing, the kind of strategic directions we might go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll just add to that, especially because we do have the anchor versus JMAC. Whereas JMAC is kind of about the policy and the electeds and initiatives from that level. This feels more organizationally staff kind of up and down, but trying to, I think, better define that. So I think that will make some of the work within our organizations easier to describe as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so is this kind of like a sub point to boundaries here of just the types of work that we're doing compared as different from other groups?
Yeah, like this is not just government, it's government and nonprofit and private organizations and higher ed, whereas there's some other ones that are closely related that are different makeups and different levels of people in the organization. And I think that I know there's confusion around that, at least within some of our organizations. So
yeah. Cool. Let me know if I'm kind of trying to capture the gist of these questions. If I mischaracterize anything here, let me know. I'll change it. Okay, effect with an A. Other thoughts on this? Things that you'd want to clarify through a charter? Cool. Well, if we can figure all this out, that will be great work. So, and of course, other things may come up as we go. So, okay, awesome. Thank you for that input. If other ideas come up, or if you have charter examples, you know, from the past that you want to share throughout this process, please feel free to do so. Okay. So, there was, so with the rest of our time today, I wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive into one component of the charter in particular, and this is decision-making processes. And the reason I wanted to start here is that, you know, as we go through making a charter, we're going to have to be making decisions about what we're putting in the charter. And there are, you know, this is a participatory group. We're very, you know, conversational and open and transparent, and there are a wide range of decisions, and not all of them have to have the same, you know, rules and guidelines and expectations. But we should start being clearer about how, you know, what are the things we're deciding on together, and how we're going to do that. So I wanted to introduce a framework here. I'll take about maybe just a few minutes to introduce framework, and then I had an activity that I wanted to do together. with you to just start thinking about decisions as a group. We're not going to answer all these questions today, but we'll just kind of get the ball rolling and thinking about decisions. So, okay, so the first thing I wanted to introduce here, those of you who are involved in the strategic framework process may recognize this, but this is a tool I often use with collaborations called gradients of agreement. So instead of just doing a yes or no vote, like, oh yes, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, this is kind of a spectrum of agreement that allows for a lot more nuance. You know, there's enthusiastic support on one side, like this is amazing, this is totally what we need. There's also kind of lukewarm support in the middle, like, yeah, I don't object to this, but I don't really care that, you know, one way or the other about it. With yes or no, you can usually, you know, find a lot of people who have kind of met opinions kind of leaning toward yes. So, you know, it's important to have kind of this nuance to just have, you know, realize where everyone is and have the right conversations together. So, so I just wanted to remind people of this spectrum. Okay, the next part of this, any questions about this? Okay. Okay, so the next part of this framework for our activity today, this is kind of a range of different types of agreements. So there are lots of ways to make decisions as a group. And these are kind of from right to left, least participatory to most participatory over here. So, you know, there's some decisions, you know, everyone can kind of just make up their own mind about this. And it's not that important. Everyone can kind of just have their own decision. The kind of the next level of like formality here is, say we have a single decision maker. So just one person is empowered to make a decision for the group. Say, you know, maybe Hunter is in charge of this certain committee, and that committee thinks, or not in charge, but, you know, leading that, and the committee says, oh, we trust Hunter, he can make all the decisions for us on this. We don't mind, because he knows a lot about this topic. Moving up the participatory spectrum here, we have consultative. So really similar, you know, one person is the final decision maker, but they're going to get a lot of input beforehand. You know, so, you know, maybe Liz is chairing a committee and needs to make a decision, but really is going to make sure that we get everyone's input before making that decision. Getting slightly more participatory here, we have majority vote. So this is the type of decision making we kind of use here in our US democracy. You know, whichever vote has the most votes wins. This is participatory, but, you know, it can often, with really high stakes decisions, you know, lead to some schisms. You know, if you have 51% of people who think one way and 49 who think another, you're going to have half of your people who might kind of be pissed off about a decision. So it's a little participatory, but not the most participatory way. So then moving up here, we have lukewarm support. You know, so many participants enthusiastically support the decision. Some feel neutral about it, but no one objects. You know, so that might be a decision where, you know, some of us are over here, some of us are over here, but, you know, no one is really vetoing this. And sometimes that's a great way to make a decision if it's not super important. And then the most participatory here is strong support. So in order for us to move forward with this, we need everyone to really enthusiastically support the decision, or we can't move forward. Does that make sense? Questions about this? Okay, I probably talked too much about that because the caffeine is kicking in this morning. Okay, so when do we use certain decisions? So, you know, I kind of talked a little bit about this, but you can think about it in terms of like overall importance. Like if it's a super important decision, you might want to have a lot more strong support. If it's not a very important decision, we can just nominate someone to make a decision. If it's going to last a long time, you know, we might want more participatory process. If it's a short-term decision, it might not matter. If it's a simple problem, you know, Hunter knows the answer, we'll trust him. Great. If it's a tough problem, we all need to, I'm picking on you, Hunter, because you're first on my screen, but you probably know a lot of answers too, you know, and et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, I don't want to belabor this anymore because I want to get to an activity. So questions about this framework before we start to use it? Okay, so I'll invite you all to visit your email, because I emailed all of you a link to this Google Doc about 15 minutes ago.
Not working for me.
It's not working for you? Ah, darn. Okay.
Says I don't have access.
Well,
I don't know if other people can access it.
Shoot, I might not have, hang on a second. I'll change the permissions here. Hang on. Stop screen share. Okay. Sorry, I was for making that sound. Okay. There we go. All right, I see people popping up in here. For those of you who still can't access this for any reason, that's totally fine. Okay, so anyway, so here we are. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of play around with a couple of types of decisions that the network might have to make, and see how we feel about them. So this is a grid. So there's a type of decision. We just came up with 6 to start with. There, and we'll see how far we get. And then there's, how do we want to make this decision? And the point being, any one of these decision-making rules is fine depending on the context. So maybe this one, we want lukewarm support. Maybe these, someone else can have a, so this is basically how we're going to fill out this grid, like deciding which type of rule we think makes sense for certain types of decisions. So what I'd like to do to start is let's start with the decision of like, who is a member of this network? And so what I'd invite you all to do, if you're in this Google document, is just put a X in whichever one of these you think would be a way that we'd want to make this decision as a network. And if you are unable to access the Google Doc, feel free to just call out your answer. All right. Any other opinions?
Danny, I would put lukewarm support.
Cool. Well, this is interesting. We have quite a spread here. So someone suggested strong support. Why did you choose that?
That was me. And I don't know if I can articulate it, but it just feels like we went through this at JMAC. We've added 2 members to JMAC in the past year, and so it just felt like if there's a lot of work, there's a lot to commit to, and that we want everybody on board with that. And I just would imagine if somebody was objecting, then you're already starting out with issues. So to me, if you're going to add somebody to the network, you want strong support for that.
And I guess I'll pop in and say the reason I went lukewarm is because it said no one objects, but it's just some people might not be enthusiastic.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a few other folks who said lukewarm. What are some thoughts about that?
I think with what Alicia said too, like, and we all have different networks and may know different people, and so as long as there's no objection, I'm all right with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if there is objection, that's what discussion and conversation is for.
Yeah,
sure.
The no objection to the decision at least was definitely swayed my little vote there. But I could see, because if not everyone knows them, it's one thing, but if there's some enthusiasm and no objection, and I think that's how we've been handling it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so no objection is an important part of this, but having some sort of discussion about this as a group is also an important component.
The no objection one, to me, so at Metro, we adopted a definition of, we wrestled with this with our executive cabinet a few years ago, and we adopted a definition kind of decision making of a definition of consensus is I can live with it and support it. And so occasionally we'd have some big thing and we'd go around the table, and if everyone said I can live with it and support it, we'd move forward. To me, deciding who is going to be part of this is foundational. So that's why I certainly, you'll see me put the lukewarm thing on a whole bunch of decisions, because I think, if, like I said, I like that. I can live with it and support it. I don't object. I may not love it, may not be, if I were in charge of the world, I might not do it this way, but I can see that most of you want to go this route and I can live with it. Right. So I think you'll see a lot of that today as we go down this list, but to me, membership is just foundational. So that was the distinction I made.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Hunter. I like that definition of consensus. So we also had oh yeah, go ahead, Abigail.
Oh, I just wanted, like, Hunter mentioned that this is something the executives at Metro Parks do, and they've taught all of us to do this. And one of the major components of this is that we think about, this is not the best or only solution. And so now I'm even doing it with Hunter right now. I'm like, oh, can I live with strong support? Can I provide consensus for the idea that we make our decisions about who's a member based on strong support? And I'm like, yeah, I can, yeah, because I know Hunter's thinking it's not the best and only solution. But yeah, I can live with it, support it. If we make it if we do add additional barrier to entry based on sort of like all of us coming together unanimously supporting this, that's a little tricky. That makes me kind of feel a little feelings, but you know, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. This is a great conversation. I should have said this isn't a decision-making meeting. This is an exploratory meeting about decision-making. So, you know, this is all, again, I say the process is part of the product here. So we're, you know, getting these perspectives is really helpful. Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's try another one.
But Danny, this is Linda. Can I speak to my majority vote?
Oh yeah, that's right. I was gonna, yes.
Just because I want, again, having not spent a lot of time with the group yet, I need to get a feel for how formal we want these decisions to be. I'm chair of a job committee for CPARP, and so we formalize this type of thing, but also putting myself in the place of someone out there in the region that would like to be a part of this and presents themselves. I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable with the group saying, yeah, I can live with you and I can support it. You know what I mean? So that's how it hit me at first when I heard, yeah, I can live with it and I'll support it. But I'm probably being too formal in saying the majority vote. So I don't know if the intent is, and I'll learn that as I get more involved with the group as a whole, of how formal do we want to be on these things. Because if I were to apply to a group and say, I would really like to join it, and they vote me in, it gives me much more confidence, I guess, and a greater feeling of membership than an informal, yeah, I can live with it. I don't know, just my thought process. But again, is it formal or not? So that was my thought process.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You know, and our familiarity with voting, you know, makes it like, oh yeah, I understand. We're going to have a vote, and you know, then this is the decision. So yeah, to that point, Linda, I think it's really important that, you know, as we decide on which decision-making rules we're having for certain scenarios, that you know, we can appreciate them all as like this is, you know, the way that we make this decision, and it is as formal as any other way, and they might be different depending on what decision it is. So anyway, thank you for those thoughts. Okay, so let's try network structure and leadership. How will we decide? How should we decide, or how might we decide what structure to make this network, how we're going to organize ourselves, how we might govern ourselves?
I would drop mine on the strong support, Danny.
Thanks, Doug. All right, so I'm seeing interesting split here. Cool. So we have a couple for strong support, a couple for majority, well, several for strong support, a couple for majority vote. Majority vote. Can we hear from someone just about kind of your thinking? Why does that seem a good way to decide these things?
I divided my input between strong support and majority vote. I think at some point, you know, we'll need to take some sort of poll on where people are at, and there may be some slight differences. I don't know. I was struggling with that one, but that's where I was. I was kind of divided.
Mm-hmm. How about some other folks?
I was one of the majority vote people there, and I guess it's particularly in, you know, I'm involved in lots of groups where you select a leader and all that, and it just feels like this is the taking that vote. Ideally, it's unanimous, right? Ideally, we all agree that Abigail's going to be in charge, and we're all voting for it, right? And kind of to Linda's point, that sends a really strong message. If it's 5-4, you have issues, right? So, so to me, that felt like a good way to send the message of where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels really, it feels more formal if you're going to decide things like leadership and structure. You know, ideally you're getting consensus before you make that decision, but it really feels like a decision to be made. So.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So a sense that, you know, we should have discussion. We should have a sense of where people are leaning. But then at the end of the day, we're just going to have to make a call at some point. Yeah. Other thoughts on this? Thinking that people want to share?
I just had Hunter's logic in my head about who's a member. I just applied it to that because I think it was a great argument for the strong support. I've just tagged it to the network structure and leadership bucket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah, I'm realizing here, you know, talking about structure and leadership in abstract makes it kind of hard to talk about how we're going to make this decision. So, okay, let's try other thoughts that people want to share. Any insights, thinking behind structure and leadership? Okay, let's try focus of working groups. How will we decide what our working groups are going to focus on? I should add here, you know, we have 3 working groups right now. In the future, we may have 3 different working groups. We may have 5 working groups. We may have 1 working group. You know, those will likely change over time.
Yeah, I think I've put my mark on the lukewarm support, Danny.
Cool. Well, there's strong support for lukewarm support on this topic. I'm realizing here, maybe this name is making this seem slightly less formal. It's like,
yeah, it does.
Like,
I don't.
Yeah, what can we
Don't
call
care for
this? Like
lukewarm.
generally supportive. I don't
To
know.
me, that's just the consensus model.
Yeah.
Like what Hunter was saying, that's my framework for it.
And then this is like
Who is-
unanimous.
Is one of them, which one of the styles would be one where someone has autonomy that's been approved by the group so that the work group knows that it's trusted to make its own decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think this is more what work groups do we have, not necessarily within the work groups. Maybe, or maybe there are 2 different angles of that, because as Danny just mentioned, like the work groups could change over time. And as the group as the group as a large is focusing on what the work could be. And because like I may be one of the few that was around when we originally picked some of these, and then there's been other work over time, but like back in the day, how we kind of came to the focus of, oh, here's some things we all have work around and focus that, and there was kind of general consensus. But those can change over time, or we can add to them as we find more things for us to do work together around. But then I think there is that second thing of within the work group, once it's formed, is that what that decision making might be. I think that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's so I should I think what I had in my mind here was like establishing a work group around a certain topic. And then I've added another one here, which is like the specific goals and work plans of each working group. That's kind of a different piece of work, right? So the network established these 3 working groups last summer, you know, broadly speaking, and now each working group is doing its own work to, you know, refine its goals. So that's a good clarification.
And that's where I like the consensus support, lukewarm, whatever, is because some of these work groups aren't necessarily going to involve every single one of the members, but it would maybe have a majority of the members. And then another one might have a different mix of the members just based on what it is. Like for Tacoma Public Schools, housing is less of an obvious one there, but we have a voice in it because we have families with needs, but it's a different kind of participation than some of the others.
Mm-hmm. Right. So say we wanted to start a group around like investing endowments in sustainability or something like that. It's like, if I don't have any endowments, I don't care one way or another if we have that working group, but you all can go ahead and do it. You know, so that would be an example of this, what we were previously calling lukewarm and now we're calling consensus, right?
I like.
Yeah. So
I think
to clarify these terms,
like
go ahead, Hunter.
I was just gonna say, I think the healthcare pathways one is a great example. There are very clear members of this organization that should be working on that. I don't know, you know, Metro Parks probably, you know, we don't see a role for that for us in that. We do in procurement, not necessarily healthcare. Healthcare is a big deal in this community and we get it. We would support it, but don't see our role in it.
Yeah, and just for term clarification here. So yeah, so basically what we're now calling consensus is no objections. And, you know, people can have a range of enthusiasm, but no one objects. Unanimous support is we are all enthusiastically supporting, and no lukewarm feelings about it. Okay, cool. Other thoughts on establishing working groups? This is a great conversation. Okay, how about, all right, I'm just looking at time here. Cool. Okay, what about if we were to say make some public commitments? You know, this network, all of our anchors agree to be carbon neutral by 2050. I just made that up, you know, but you know, what would we need in order to make a public commitment together as a network?
I would drop my mark on the unanimous support there, Danny.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of unanimous and one consensus. Any thoughts folks want to share about their thinking on this?
This is Doug. So I would have to have, you know, support from my company before a commitment could be made on behalf of our company. So I'd have a hard time seeing something sneak out without that complete support.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in going through a process that required us to have unanimous support, you know, we would all make sure that we're engaging in the conversations that we need to have as an organization and thinking through all these things together.
Well, and also, this is Linda, if we're saying making public commitments, we're going to our elected officials, I don't know, possibly publications in newspapers or, you know, advertisements of some type. We're going out there to the public. And I'm thinking we would want everybody in the group to agree with the message that we're going to relay. Everybody be willing to go to their own elected officials or management with the same message. Because we all know if you've got most of them with one message and the other one that possibly says, yeah, I didn't really agree with that, it kind of undermines the whole process and all the effort put forward. So I think unanimously everybody needs to have the same voice if we're going to go public with some of these things. Of course, thinking from a procurement standpoint, because we're going to be hitting, all groups will be hitting a large audience. That's our hope anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Linda. Yeah, that points to, one reason we might want to have a very participatory process is like if each individual anchor is going to have to interact with, the impacts of this decision, then we all need to have a place in it. So this commitment, we'd all have to be engaging with that as individuals and as a whole. Well, we've all kind of migrated to unanimous on this one. How's this activity for folks? Is this good conversation? Is this, are you digging it? Are you tired of it?
No, I think it's good. And I'm getting, I think we get to know each other a little better this way too, and kind of see the common goals. I like it. Thank you.
Cool. And I'm calling on folks and asking questions. If other folks want to jump in, don't wait on me to call on you. Okay, let's try another. Or other thoughts about public commitments? We all picked the same box, but we might not have all picked it for the same reason. So, okay, cool. Let's try data. How are we going to decide on what data we might want to collect and track? And this could be disparity studies, metrics to track our progress, all sorts of data we could track.
I would probably jump on the consultative. Wow. Oh, more coffee.
Yeah. Coffee definitely makes it easier to say consultative.
Thanks.
I was just thinking about Ali, but he's not on the call at the moment.
What made you think of him?
Just the way he understands data collection and
Yeah.
analysis and presentation. Like, it made me think that if we're making decisions about data collection, I would defer to expertise.
Mm.
So yeah, maybe I'm with you, Doug.
Abby, that's who I thought of too. And I did consensus in the to that word. I don't drink coffee, so I'm just going to struggle with that word all day. But that's exactly what I was thinking too, Abby.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, we probably want an expert opinion on whatever data we're collecting, the issues and things like that. And maybe there's some sort of hybrid consensus consultative. We can hear from our experts and then make a decision as a group. But yeah, other thoughts on this? What were some folks is thinking on either consensus or consultative? Oh gosh, I'm losing it. Consultative. Cool. Okay. So one thing I heard there was that, yeah, having informed, expert opinions on topics will be important regardless of how the decision is made in that. Okay. This next one here, pursuing a grant or a funding source that has specific requirements. So we've talked about, resourcing the network, establishing a strong backbone organization. Say we wanted to go after, commit to applying to a $300,000 over 3-year grant to fund this network. How should we make those sorts of decisions as a group?
I like how you just slipped that in there, Danny.
What? That we're
Just if we were going to consider applying for.
hypothetically.
Yeah.
We're not, to my knowledge, but say we were.
So Danny, that feels that, like, to me anyway, the consultative bucket, again, maybe just deferring to the conversation we just had about what data to collect, that there are people that know grant and funding much more precisely than certainly I do. So
Yeah, thanks for that perspective. And this reminds me of this kind of subpoint of these, identifying who this final decision maker is. So say in our structure, maybe we have, a funding chair, or a small team that applies for a grant. We might give input and they could make the final decision. Could be an example of that.
I like that clarification also as to what the consultative is, and I'm shifting mine. So I hit both the majority one and the consultative, and I think, yeah, consultative, with the fact that it is like everyone's kind of in the mix, but once we have a structure, there'll be a point person. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. Implicitly in this data one, the consultative one, we're all just going to ask Ali what he thinks, and then we'll make a decision. Here, it might be someone else who is in the funding sphere.
I think the biggest difference between the funding one and the data one is that there may be a reason some organization, despite if somebody thinks it's a great idea, might say not participating in providing that data for XYZ reason. And that would be the biggest thing. Whereas applying for a grant seems, if it's for a specific purpose, I don't know if everyone needs to agree. But I don't know, just a thought, because sometimes data sensitivity issues and such.
Yeah, that's a really helpful distinction between those two.
Yeah, move mine. Oh, I'll move mine.
Which one was yours? They all look the same.
I'm in the consensus. Move it over to consultative to make some really good points.
Are there thoughts on this for either consultative or consensus? Yeah, so kind of implicitly here, we're hinting at things that we might want to have some structure around, in our, as a network. As we start having consultative roles, we're kind of delegating certain types of decisions. Okay, so the last one, and this is one that we just added today, so is here, the setting the goals and the work plans of each working group. How do we think those sorts of decisions should be made as a network?
yeah, I would select the consensus support.
Seeing quite a few consensuses. I'm curious, maybe from someone who hasn't spoken as much in the meeting, if anyone wants to volunteer to share some thinking about why consensus is the option they chose for this one.
I feel like if we're working as a group, consensus would be most appropriate to keep the work moving forward.
Right. So we don't want to bog it down by getting, having to get people who might not be as involved in the work, kind of keeping the conversation, prolonging the conversation. We can just, move when we have good alignment. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Casey?
Yeah.
Other thoughts on this? Yeah, this strikes me as a similar example, with establishing the working groups, maybe, I don't want to be in part of the workforce one because I don't have a workforce program. And so those who are involved can make those decisions more, and I can just stand by and support it. Cool. Okay. So are there any other types of, so these were just, 7 random decisions that we could make as a group. We might have to make these as a group at some point. Any other examples of types of decisions that anyone can think of right now that you'd want to try this out on? Cool. This is the only thing keeping us from the end of this meeting. So I appreciate the the lack of volunteering an additional question. Cool. Okay. Reflections on this activity. How was this for folks? What was helpful? What was maybe not helpful? What new questions do you have?
I think it provided
I
some good-
appreciate it. Cool.
Yeah, some good insights and into what we're all thinking.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation and the thoughts that people sharing their thoughts. That was helpful to me.
I kind of thought a lot of these decisions had already been made. So this is helpful.
I was thinking the same thing. I thought, hey, can we take this back to our work groups? And we got a head start. So thanks, Danny.
Yeah, working groups might have similar sort of matrices like these to figure out too. Cool. Yeah, well, thanks everyone. So yeah, I think the opportunity to have these conversations, I see that as the biggest opportunity of this charter process. Is kind of get some of this stuff out in the open, see how we're all thinking, and then find a way that we can move forward. Similar to the spirit of good enough. Like this is good enough for us to move forward with more clarity, and we don't need to bog down our momentum and our good work as we're answering some of these questions. So stay tuned for more about this. So okay, so our next network meeting is June 17th, 9:30 a.m. A possible topic for that is some of you remember the research report that came out earlier this year from the procurement research at the end of last year. So Emerald Cities Collaborative and Healthcare Without Harm are going to present at the next meeting, and we might have some discussions about what to do next with those insights and that conversation. Between now and then I'll be reaching out to those of you who are kind of the primary point of contact for your institution, and see if we can identify representation for the charter committee. There's a small group of us who are just going to sculpt some of the skeleton of the charter to have something for that committee group to work on and dig into. So if you're interested in being part of the constructing of that framework, shoot me an email. Love to add you to that group, but know that the real meat of the conversation is going to be once we get into that charter committee that has someone from every anchor on it. Okay, other questions? Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for spending part of your morning together. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's always nice to see all of you, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.
Bye.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, everybody.